Good morning. You're shocked. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So here we are in the state capitol on Wednesday. No speaker, no supermajority, no General Assembly in session. We're in a crisis. We don't have a state budget. Our schools are being threatened with not having the funds to open. Our government operations are at risk of a crisis, lack of cash availability to fund key vendors and key suppliers, and no General Assembly. Speaker Madigan has reneged on his commitment to have the General Assembly meet at least every Wednesday. They're not here. Frankly, meeting every Wednesday is not enough. They should be here virtually every day of the week. I'm here working every day. They should be here working. We should get this resolved. And the Speaker has slow-walked, slow-rolled the working groups. They were making progress for months. We were close to an agreement. Reform-minded Democrats with Republicans to come to a grand bargain where we could have a balanced budget for the first time in forever, and reforms to grow jobs, grow our economy, grow family incomes, protect property taxpayers, reform our pension system to make it constitutionally fair and affordable. The Speaker Madigan saw we were getting close to reforms, put his thumb on the process several weeks ago, and they've been basically slow-walked ever since. And now the Speaker is using the working groups as an excuse not to have the General Assembly do its job. He slowed them down and then basically saying, oh, the working groups are still talking, so the General Assembly will work if and when the working groups come to a result, while he's quietly slowed it down and made sure that they're not coming to resolution. Speaker Madigan and his supermajority are clearly working to create a crisis, clearly putting stress in the system, threatening our schools, and threatening our essential government services, our human services, our correction system, our core government operations, using it as leverage to force a bailout of Chicago public schools and the city of Chicago, and to force a major tax hike after the general election in November, force a tax hike without reforms. The Speaker's been pretty darn clear he does not want reforms. We will continue to negotiate in good faith with his reform-minded caucus members. There are Democrats who know that the Speaker is wrong. We're hoping that enough of them come together to stand up to him at some point before too long. We will continue to negotiate with them in good faith to get compromises. And we're willing to compromise on virtually everything. But what we can't do is nothing other than have unbalanced budgets with huge tax hikes to try to cover them up. That will not solve our problems. Our problems are too big, too intense. That will not solve anything. So, in the spirit of good faith compromise, we'll continue to negotiate with reform-minded Democrats to come to a solution. In the meantime, our schools should not be held hostage, and our government operations should not be held up to try to create a crisis. I think most of you in this room know that the Attorney General, Lisa Madigan, has tried to create a crisis. She has not succeeded yet, but she's been working in the courts to try to stop our hardworking state employees from getting paid through the courts. She has not succeeded in that yet, but she's been working that's another attempt that's been going on to try to create a crisis, to create leverage for Chicago bailout and a tax hike without reforms. That's what that's about. We've got a solution. There is a solution here, and this is what we need your viewers and your listeners to understand. There is a solution here right now. We've got bills in the General Assembly introduced. One of the spokespeople for Speaker Madigan's Democrats said yesterday there's no bills to vote on. That is false. There are bills to vote on. We've got a bill to fully fund our schools, the full foundation level, with a hold harmless for any school district that gets less money under Speaker Madigan's funding formula. Remember, the current funding formula that's been in place since 2003 was put in place by Speaker Madigan, President Emil Jones, and Governor Blagojevich. This has been in place for a long time. Speaker Madigan has not wanted to change the funding formula that he put in place. I'm willing to make sure that even with his funding formula that's currently in place, no school district gets less money, including Chicago. Even though Chicago's enrollment has declined, we'll hold it harmless. So Chicago will get at least as much money this year as last year. There is a school funding bill that we've introduced. It should be voted on so our schools can open on time. Our teachers and our principals can have the confidence that they're going to get the support they deserve. Because while the budget negotiations continue, schools should not be put at risk. Our students are too important. Our teachers are too important. We also have a solution for our government operations and our essential human services that need to be funded. And I have not connected any negotiations about reforms to it. It's just purely a stopgap budget bill to get us through January. No reforms with it, no other negotiations needed. It's a stopgap budget bill to fund essential human services, correction services, government operations to get us through January, which is what President Cullerton and Speaker Madigan have indicated in our discussions, that that's when they, after the general election has been, when they'll be willing to pick up serious negotiations again and maybe take some real votes on reforms and a balanced budget. So we have solutions. They need to get passed. They should be passed now. We should not have a crisis created by the supermajority Democrats. They should be here today voting on those two bills. Those two bills should pass. With that, I'm going to turn the podium over to some of our other speakers, and then I'll come back with you so we can do Q&A. I'd like to turn the podium over now to Secretary of Education, Beth Purvis.
Thank you, Governor. I am here just to review the facts related to HB 6583, SB 3434, which is a bill that is sitting in both houses of the General Assembly that would ensure that our schools open on time and that students, teachers, parents, and the communities know that summer school will go forward and that we will be able to open schools fully funded for next year. What this bill does is, first, it ends proration. Since 2009, proration has cost Illinois public school districts more than $3.8 billion. At the same time, they have been forced to deal with over 140 unfunded mandates. By increasing the GSA by approximately $55 million, we will end proration. Although the distribution of the GSA occurs via the current formula, which you all know just depends on district enrollment, percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and local available resources, this bill also adds an additional $105 million to make sure that no school loses funding from FY16 to FY17. For example, the Chicago Public Schools, which, because it has seen a decrease in enrollment, a decrease in the percentage of students who live in poverty, and an increase in local available resources, they would not, under the current formula, they would lose $74 million. With $105 million in hold harmless, that would not occur. This bill also adds approximately $8 million in line items, including money for advanced placement classes, money for after-school matters, which are after-school program in the city of Chicago, money for agricultural education, money for arts and foreign language education, money to support the lowest performing schools in the state, money for national board certified teachers, and money for Teach for America. In addition, it increases early childhood funding by $75 million, which will do two things. It will ensure that an additional 1,000 full-day child care seats are available in the fall, and it will ensure that we meet the obligations of a federal grant for early childhood. Again, the implications of this bill passing mean that all of our pre-K through 12 schools will open on time and funded in the fall. And if it passes immediately, it will help support those summer programming that are important in so many parts of the state. Again, the increase in early childhood will mean there are over 1,000 more early childhood seats. Every district will receive the same funding that it received last year. This bill uses revenue that has already been identified, meaning that that this funding, which will be the largest pre-K-12 funding in Illinois history, is also fiscally responsible. And we also want to say very clearly, this does not mean we do not believe that there is a need for a new pre-K through 12 funding formula. There's been significant progress in the last few months towards developing a more equitable and adequate formula, but we're not there yet. So this bill prioritizes getting schools open immediately instead of waiting for that work to be completed. But alongside the passage of this bill, the governor and his staff pledged to work with the General Assembly to continue work on a funding formula that could be in place as early as fiscal year 18. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Jason Barrickman, State Senator, 53rd District from Bloomington. You know, it's disappointing that the legislature is not convening when you consider that today we're all aware of the most pressing issue facing the people of the state of Illinois, that being whether or not our schools are going to open this fall. Talk to any teacher, talk to any student or parent, and they'll tell you that there is real concern about whether or not their schools are going to open this fall, and if they do open, whether they're going to have a full 5-day school week, the classes that are going to be offered, and the like. And so this is an imminent issue, it's pressing, and we in the legislature need to be here working to solve this issue. Now, in solving it, by the way, and making sure our schools open this fall. Now, we can solve this issue overnight. The legislation, the governor and Secretary Purvis has talked about, the legislation is filed. You know, we've got budget bills that, if adopted, would guarantee that our schools open this fall. You might ask, what's holding that up? And I ask that question of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, rank and file Democrats who are at home in their districts, I think today need to answer to the people they represent. When they're asked, why aren't they supporting the budget bills that guarantees our schools open this fall? There's no good answer. I don't know what they're holding out for. These bills are clean. There's nothing attached to them. Again, all they do is guarantee that our schools open this fall. There's no reason why rank and file Democrats can't vote for these bills. The only reason I think they're not voting for them is because Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton won't call those bills for a vote. If they're called for a vote, I think they pass. I think we create predictability for our educational system, and we move forward. Now, some Democrats, primarily President Cullerton, but some Democrats, point to their opposition to school funding because they want to insert to a discussion of whether our schools open the notion of parity. And they certainly talk about, or they limit their discussions of parity to their view of where the system doesn't favor their school system. So I think it's fair to have a discussion about parity. And in fact, I'd challenge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, if we want to talk about parity, I'm ready to talk about it, but let's talk about parity for the entire educational system and not just parity for one system. Now, what do I mean by that? Today, the Chicago public school system is treated differently than every other school district in the state. President Cullerton likes to talk about pension parity, but you never hear from President Cullerton any discussion about all those other special deals that Chicago gets that every other school district doesn't. Unlike every other school district in this state, Chicago gets to use third-party contractors, which saves Chicago taxpayers money. Chicago gets to determine their class sizes, their staffing levels, their calendars. They get to use technology. All these decisions are given to Chicago that other school districts don't have. What else? Chicago's given budget flexibility. They get to make decisions on staffing based on their current financial condition in the days before their school year. Every other school district, the RIF process that many of us, especially downstate, are aware of, that RIF process that dictates to school districts that they must notify their personnel, their employees, of staffing levels in April, that process doesn't apply to Chicago Public Schools. What else? We've talked at length about the fact that Chicago Public Schools does not have parity with the rest of the state. They have the Chicago Block Grant. The Block Grant, which guarantees certain percentages of statewide funding for mandated categoricals to one school district. Now, if we're going to have this discussion of parity, I think we ought to have it on all the issues of parity that affect all of our schools in all regions of the state, whether it be Chicago suburbs, or downstate. It's important to note when I talk about all these differences, the special deals that Chicago gets, those deals were given under Democratic-controlled legislatures. Many of these benefits were given at a time when, think of who the proponents were to these things. The Chicago Teachers Union supported many of these measures that I just spoke to. The City of Chicago supported them. IFT, AFSCME, SEIU. Many of the measures that I just put forward as issues of parity passed both chambers with a unanimous vote. Today, then Senator Barack Obama was co-sponsor to some of these measures. So again, if we want to talk about parity, let's talk about parity for the entire system. But as we do that, and I'm glad to have that discussion, I hope we continue our work in the working groups. I'm glad to have those discussions, but as we do that, that still gives no excuse for doing what should be done today. Guarantee that our schools open this fall, remove all the doubt, and pass a clean school funding bill like the one that we've put forward in the legislature today. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Representative Ron Sandak.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ron Sandak. I'm the state representative from the 81st. My friend and colleague Jason, I think, more than adequately addressed some of the tension that occurs regularly in the General Assembly and some of the conflation that's occurred with respect to whether there's a deal to be made and whether it makes sense to have the General Assembly in session. Let me be clear. I was disappointed with the Speaker's decision not to have us in full session. There is work the General Assembly must do. There are two bills that we should have voted on last week, that we should have voted on today, and we should vote on tomorrow or the next day whenever we reconvene. There is a stopgap budget that gets us through 2017 or to 2017, and importantly, you've heard it from the previous speakers, there is a K through 12 budget bill that funds schools and absolutely harms no school district at all that we can vote on tomorrow, and we should be voting on tomorrow. I'm here today because I'm part of the working group assemblage of both Democrats and Republicans, and I want to report that in each and every endeavor we've had tremendous progress. We've had professional collegiality across the aisle, and we're making gains. Despite, frankly, Speaker Madigan's attempts about 2 weeks ago to slow walk the process and shut it down, we're chugging along, but we should have every member of the General Assembly in Springfield doing the people's business, which is passing two bills. Two bills that take the pressure off the schools so that families know their kids can go to school. I suspect there are a number of school districts that do not have the financial wherewithal to open in August and September, let alone stay open without major cuts as we stand here right now. There are some school districts that are fine, and that's unfortunate that there's this disparity. And that's where the conflation occurs. I think the Speaker and the Senate President are wrongfully combining school equity and funding with a current budget to get people to school, kids to school, for summer school and for the fall. And that's unfortunate as well. Let me just say this, because I think it's been already said, but I'll reiterate it. There is no real good reason why we're not in session. There is no good reason why we're not attending to the pending catastrophe that I contend the Speaker and Senate President wish to have occur. There's no good reason for it. There is no justifiable reason for us not being here and working towards a budget solution and a K through 12 funding solution. They are attainable. The Republicans have had, both in the Senate and the House, bills from this governor and this administration that would take care of the problem. They have been deliberately ignored for a reason, and that's a political reason, and that, unfortunately, is no good. Let me just say one more thing. I pledge to continue to show up every time I can for working group sessions or in full session to work with anybody to get a sensible deal done for the people of Illinois. But in any endeavor, that requires reform. We find ourselves at this juncture for a reason, doing the same thing over and over again. Tax, spending, borrowing, and spending beyond our means has gotten us to this critical financial juncture. We must have reform. Every sensible Democrat, and there are plenty, know that in their heart of hearts, that we cannot do the same thing over and over. We're at this juncture because of bad decisions in the past. It doesn't matter anymore. We now need good-hearted, good-souled, well-intentioned legislators to step up, attend, participate, and take votes that matter for the people of Illinois. Thank you.
Well said, thank you, Mr. Representative. All right, open it up to questions.
Governor, when are you going to call a special session?
Well, in my conversations with the Speaker and as our staffs have talked, the Speaker's been clear. He doesn't want to take votes on any of the bills we've introduced. He doesn't want to take votes. He just wants to have the working groups slow walked. And what we would end up doing is wasting time. I'm not into wasting time. If the Speaker would send any signal at all that he's ready to take votes, we should have them here. Right now, he's not indicating that at all.
Governor, you said that Democrats are corrupt because they're trying to leverage crisis for a tax increase. But when you unveiled your turnaround agenda more than a year ago, you said you were going to leverage crisis. Crisis creates opportunity for reforms, is what you said. What makes it okay for you to do that and not for Democrats?
I didn't create this crisis. I did not create this crisis. This was created by Speaker Madigan's supermajority. They created it in the past on their taxing and spending bills. They're creating it now. I'm trying to find a solution to the crisis. That's the major difference.
I believe there's a working group that's starting over at Stratton, like any minute now, or just starting the budget group. Would you stop by, or do you know that's going on today? Does this blow that up by talking about this, or what?
No, it doesn't blow it up at all. The working groups are meeting on various topics fairly frequently.
Okay, and Governor Edgar, again, yesterday said that, I think in a forum in Chicago, that the real problem, what's caused this crisis, is that your turnaround agenda, you won't agree to a budget without getting those reforms. He said it before. You said something like, well, he's part of the problem. You want to expand on that? Or why is he wrong when this popular Republican governor says that your push for reform and the tax coming off without you agreeing to it coming back to even where it was is the problem?
Again, I don't want to comment on decisions in the past.
Go ahead.
Decisions in the past that created our current crisis.
Like what?
Can I jump in?
Well, no, let the governor answer.
No, let me jump in for a second,
Well,
because,
let-
well, hold
do
on,
that on the
because
floor. Let the governor
I do it on the floor, and I want to address something, because he's in a different space than I am.
Yeah, but he's running the state here.
He is the chief executive officer of the state, and he is one of three parts of a tri-level branch of governing, which is co-equal. Couple things. One, I respect Governor Edgar a lot. I was part of the Edgar Fellows. But to be fair, his tenure and stance is distinctly different than the position we find ourselves in right now. To abandon reform would be the equivalent of doing what's been done in the past, taxing and spending.
Unless you get back to 5% where you were, and then you wouldn't have
No,
this crisis.
that's bad math, Bernie, because the math still doesn't work out.
Okay.
It does not work out, and that's still not reforming the state. Anyone that really believes we're in this crisis because of some vacuum, I think is not looking back at the past. Look, tax and spend, some bad pension decisions, including the ramp, have gotten us to this spot. I don't want to attribute blame. I want to move forward. And while I respect the governor, I don't think he's helping out. Governor Edgar is helping out with some of the commentary. The place we find ourselves right now is one where we must have reform. Any thoughtful, diligent person that looks at this situation will come to that same conclusion. In the absence of reform, we get nowhere. Now, one more point. The two temporary bills, the stopgap bill and the K-12 bill, have no turnaround or reform mechanisms in it. So this, again, conflation of issues, if the Democrats really hate those things, and frankly, most of them do not, they'd vote on those bills right now because they end the K-12 crisis and they get us through January on a budget with no new spending, no new taxes, totally fundable. That's something I'm afraid Governor Edgar and others have not emphasized.
Governor, you are here talking about the need to open schools in the fall. I get it. It is extremely important. Why is that, however, more important than the social services stopgap that you haven't acted on, that's been on your desk for a month? Or frankly, tell somebody that's waiting, that can't get drug treatment, that was sexually assaulted and doesn't have any line to call because that's shut down. Why are schools more important than all of those things?
Human services funding is critically important. That's why we have introduced our stopgap budget bill. Human services are funded. government operations are funded, essential services are funded. That's why our stopgap is there. That's why we need to get that stopgap bill passed right now.
Why not act on the bill that's on your desk right now?
That Republicans also supported that bill.
It does not have essential services in it. It is incomplete and will still, this is what I need you to understand, will still create a crisis. That bill is designed to still create a government operations crisis. That's what the key distinction you're missing. Yes.
Governor, you recently called some schools in Chicago prisons. What schools were you referring to?
I have worked for decades to try to improve Chicago public schools. I care very deeply about the children of Chicago and the teachers of Chicago. The schools, too many of the schools are depressing places.
Specific names or just?
What we need to do is fundamentally change our system. It's broken. Chicago public schools have been mismanaged for decades, and they really haven't had a lack of money. They have misspent their money terribly. Cronyism, conflicts of interest, bloated bureaucracy, a lot of patronage. The schools were used as a political operation as much or more as an education system, and that's horrible for the teachers there and horrible for the students there. My wife and I have invested time and resources there to a degree that I don't know who else has done as much as we have, and we're proud of it. I care very deeply about Chicago public schools. As I mentioned the other day, in my tours and visits and working in the schools, I have cried. It's brought tears to my eyes. When you go into some of the schools, some are fine, some are good, but too many of them are not, and it's not fair to the students. And there's so much rhetoric right now. There's all this mudslinging, and I'm being accused of this or that. Personal attacks. You can tell the election season has started. This personal attack stuff is just it's pretty irrelevant. What we got to focus on is helping all schools. We got to make sure they open, they are funded, and that even under the current funding formula that Speaker Madigan and the Democrats put in place, that no district gets less. That's why we've got to hold harmless. So even Chicago, even though they've got thousands fewer students and have been declining for years for all kinds of reasons, we can hold Chicago harmless and get them the same amount of money as last year. It's fair, it's affordable, it's funded, and we should pass our education funding bill now, and we should pass our stopgap, human services, and government operations bill now.
Governor, can you talk about those bills that you're pushing for 2 weeks now? They're fully funded. They don't spend more than we take in. But that's not true, because they rely on the court orders and consent decrees continuing, which are spending at levels of revenue we no longer have. So how, after a year and a half of pushing for spending only what we take in and, saying we're going to change things, isn't a stopgap budget from now until January just more of the same?
It's not my first choice, but we can't have the government shut down. That's unfair to the people of the state. The supermajority Democrats have not been willing to do any reforms at all, none. And when we got close to doing reforms, because there were good-hearted, reform-minded Democrats there who were there for the right reasons, and they know that our reforms are reasonable. We were getting there, and the Speaker basically pulled the plug on the process, really slowed it down. And then when we were up in arms about it, he's let it slow rock since, so we can sort of say, well, it's still happening. But it's been slowed down.
Will reforms be enough, though, in the end, if we eventually get everything that you want, to pay off this bill backlog that has grown?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Good for you. I should get that question every day. The answer is emphatically yes. Illinois has the hardest working people in America. We've got the best location of any state in America, the best agriculture, some of the best infrastructure, the capital, the heart of America, in the city of Chicago. We can and should be kicking tails. And when we get our reforms, the reason we're advocating for our reforms is because we can get more jobs, higher family incomes, property tax protection, getting some of the conflicts of interest and things out of the government. We can do this. That's what this is about. I'm so glad you asked the question. And within a couple of years, we can be paying down our debts, and we can grow our way out of these problems. And if we don't do the reforms, anybody who would argue we should do a budget, meaning when they say that, they mean raise taxes. They don't want to say that, but when they say do a budget, that means raise taxes. Anybody who thinks doing a tax hike with no reforms, and also what's created a lot of the problem, is kick the can on pension payments. It's just happened in Chicago again, good grief. And we've done it in Illinois. Anybody who thinks that not paying pensions, borrowing from the future to fund current operations, think that's a solution to anything, is just woefully mistaken. And we've got to change. And here's the exciting thing. For example, Chicago needs more good-paying middle-class jobs, not just minimum wage jobs. Chicago needs it desperately. Chicago, in the last 15 years, has lost half their manufacturing jobs. It's devastating. Every manufacturing job pays well. It's not minimum wage. Manufacturing is not minimum wage. And every manufacturing job creates another 4 to 5 jobs around it. Chicago is not competitive. And Chicago used to be the heart of manufacturing in America. All of our reforms help Chicago bring manufacturing firms back. And if we grow, we can pay down our debts, we can pay off our pensions, and we can get higher family incomes. That's exactly what we're arguing.
Governor, one thing you've said, Governor.
Just a second, yes.
Governor Rauner, doesn't Edgar have a point about the tone? He said about the tone of civility. You talked about personal attacks earlier, but yesterday you called the Senate President crooked.
The tone has been rough for 18 months. And part of the challenge is change is hard. And there's a real reluctance to change. And I agree that the tone should be better. Hopefully we'll get it better. You've heard some pretty outrageous things said coming. It's a distraction. And all of us, I think, hopefully are adults. All of us are in office to do a job. And what we should focus on, political spin and attacks and verbal sparring, that's all lovely. It's pretty irrelevant. People should be able to move it aside. I can certainly move it aside. I've been,
You're doing plenty of it. It's going both ways, Governor.
That's right.
You've been to these towns in the whole month of June, vilifying the people you're supposed to be negotiating with, bidding downstate against Chicago. What does it accomplish when our chief executive is tearing down the other party and alienating the biggest city in our state?
Here's the issue. Our supermajority party has created the crisis that we're in. They refuse to change. They want to continue the crisis. And let's be clear, the reason I'm feisty, and I'm a feisty guy, and I'm a volunteer, I'm doing this because I love Illinois, and I want jobs, and I want value for taxpayers, and I want properly funded schools, and I want to get rid of the corruption in our system. And anybody who wants to criticize me for criticizing corruption, go for it. You know what? We have a corrupt government. We have conflicts of interest in our government. That's a fact. Okay? So let's, you know what? And we can all have rhetoric, but I'm going to fight. I will always fight to change the system. Our system is broken. We've been going down the wrong road for years. Speaker Madigan has controlled it. I will say it every day. It's a fact. And anybody who says, well, we can't work together because you were mean to me yesterday. Oh, come on. Grow up. Calm down.
You said on the radio in Springfield
Thank you.
that you didn't like regionalism. That you didn't like regionalism. This is exactly
Wait, just calm down. Come on.
I mean, you
Come on.
told
Stay calm.
Sam Madonia, I hated when people pit one part of the state against another. Then you go to downstate communities and say Chicago wants your money.
The supermajority Democrats are focused on two things, and this is the reason I'm fighting. We got to be clear. Everybody needs to be clear. The supermajority Democrats are focused on two things: bailing out the city of Chicago, which has been corrupt and mismanaged and financially bereft for years, and forcing a tax hike without reforms. That's the two things they're focused on. It's a fact. That's what they're trying to do. I'm fighting against that. I have to fight against that, and I do it working for every family. I work for every family in Springfield. I work for every family in Carbondale. I work for every family in Chicago. And I want to put more money into Chicago public schools. I want to put more money into all schools as part of a balanced budget where we have economic growth to fund more money for our schools. That's what our reform is about. And to get through this crisis, to get through all the mudslinging, and we're in an election mode now. if we were adults, we would say, let's put the election's going to happen, and the flinging, that's going to happen. But we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can have electioneering and, flinging, fine, whatever, it's irrelevant. It really is irrelevant. Let's do our jobs. Let's be here. Let's negotiate a bill to get our schools open. Let's negotiate a bill to fund our human services and our central government operations. And then, as the mudflinging goes on, and it's going to continue, this is politics, and this ain't tiddlywinks here in Illinois politics, let's get reforms to grow our economy. Because if we're growing, thanks to Jordan's question, if we grow, our family incomes will go up. We'll pay down our bills. And I've said, I don't know how much it's been quoted, if we had just grown at the nation's average the last 15 years, just average growth, we wouldn't have a deficit today. We wouldn't have needed the 2011 income tax hike. We wouldn't have any unpaid bills today, and we'd have billions more in the state treasury for our schools and our human services. Economic growth is the key. That's what our reforms are about. And anybody who wants to argue and criticize, say, just do a budget with a tax hike in it, we'll fix it, won't fix it. Our debt's too big and more companies will leave. And anybody who says, well, deferring pension payments, like just happened in Chicago, will solve anything, won't solve the problem. And in fact, it'll make it worse in the long run. And employers will see that, and they won't come.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.